In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cave of Evil set featuring Luke Skywalker and Yoda on Dagobah, and then also the apparition of Darth Vader. And they are a special action figure set for the Vintage Collection. So this was released pretty early on in the relaunch of the Vintage Collection. I think this came out in 2019, if I recall correctly, maybe early 20. To this day, they still remains as probably one of the most affordable special action figure sets in the Vintage Collection, and it's even one of the most affordable options in the Vintage Collection in general. I actually got this brand new for about $15 a couple months after it was released. I never found it in stores, unfortunately. I think it was a Target exclusive at the time, if I recall correctly, and it seemed like I did see some pictures at the time, and some people's Targets had mountains of them, and they just wouldn't sell through too well. But the few that I did check out at the time, I don't recall seeing the set at all, so I had to get on eBay and get it. But still, $15 for 3 TVC action figures. It's a pretty good deal. Even in 2019 and 20, that was still a solid deal. That factors down to what, almost less than $6 per action figure. Not too bad. With that being said, though, Hasbro still has a lot of work to do with this set. You can see already that's probably not the most handsome looking Luke Skywalker in the world. The Yoda's really good, and in fact, that arguably might be the best Yoda that Hasbro has ever made to date. But unfortunately, it's not really accurate to Empire Strikes Back. And the Vader, for the most part, the Vader is the same old Vader that we've gotten before. The only difference is in the head. But I don't think Hasbro really knocked that out of the park either. As you can see, the shape of it and the proportions of it just don't look right for a Vader. And later on in the video, I'll do some comparisons between the Luke and the Vader here, so you can kind of get a clearer picture as to what I mean by the looks of these characters. So what else can I say about these? So all 3 of these characters were originally released in the Black Series 3 and 3/4 inch line. The Yoda and the Luke were released in the black and orange packaging, and then the Vader was in the TIE Fighter packaging. So it was about a year and a half difference between the 2 or the 3 action figures. The Yoda at that time looked terrible. Looking back on it, it looks really bad. The Luke looks really bad as well. And the Vader, it's about the same. There are some differences, and we'll note that here in a little bit. I don't own any of those action figures. I have seen them in stores back in 2013, and they didn't sell very well then. Yeah, this is these 3 action figures are sometimes sets that people like to make fun of on the internet. There's like I said, there's a lot of room for improvement with this. I'd really like to see Hasbro revisit it at some point between the 3 characters. I don't know if that will ever happen at this point. There's just so much back order basically on the TVC line, and now that we have these, Hasbro will probably look at it like, oh, these are the definitive versions of these characters. But still, they could use a lot of work, and I think Hasbro could do a better job on a second attempt. And between the Black Series versions and these ones, there's really not a whole lot of differences other than trying to think what there is. Luke has the photoreal face. I think these were some of the first action figures to feature the photoreal in TVC at the time. The Vader, or the apparition of Vader, he does have a photoreal face underneath as well. We'll look at that here in a minute. And then Yoda, I'm trying to think if the Yoda is a slightly different sculpt or not. He's reutilizing parts from the Revenge of the Sith Yoda in the TVC line. If you recall, that's figure like number 20, somewhere in that range. He's around the same numbering order as like Wolf and Commander Cody in those action figures, so pretty early on. The head, I think, is pretty much all new though. But still, despite whatever you may think and what other people think about this set, personally, I'm glad to have it. I've never owned a Dagobah Luke or an Empire Strikes Back somewhat of Yoda before, and I've never had this apparition of Vader. So it was welcome additions in my collection, and they're good enough. I'm one of those people, I have lots of Lukes and lots of Vaders and lots of Yodas as it is, so if they look a little bit off, it's really not that big of a deal to me. The main point is, do they get the point across to interact with a collection, basically? And I think they check that box off, quite frankly. Not perfect, but it's good enough. But anyways, let's just start getting a closer look at these guys. So as you can see, there's definitely a lot of ugly parts about this action figure. So the arm articulation is nothing like we've ever really seen on a Star Wars action figure before. This kind of reminds you of like the action figures that I wouldn't say one-hit wonders, but they don't last long at retail. Like the cheap third-party action figures that are made on the market. Something like that. And I understand why Hasbro made the arms the way they did, is they wanted Luke to be able to do the handstand and do some more acrobatics since he's training on Dagobah. But the execution of it wasn't very good. Nowadays, with TVC the way it is, I think they could redo those arms and do a lot better job. They can hide those joints a lot better. I do think it looks slightly better on this figure compared to the old one, though, and that's because the paint, I think, is probably a little better. The Yoda there, like I said, that Yoda really knocks it out of the park. As far as the rest of the sculpting work, outside the arms here and then the head, I would say the rest of it's alright. I really don't have any complaints. This Luke stands really good on his own, even without the help of a stand. So we'll put Yoda to the side here for a moment. And we'll focus on Luke first. So like I said, not the most handsome Luke, and I'll just bring out the Mandalorian version of Luke here. This isn't probably the best representation of Luke either, but it's definitely worlds better compared to this one, as you can see. I think the sculpt for this Mandalorian Luke is really good, but the paint, it could be a little bit better, I think. And let's go ahead and take this backpack off here. It's interesting how they did this as well. It's been a while since I've taken that off. But you just unhook that that latch there, and then let's see about taking this off. It's a little tight around him. So you can see, pretty plain for the most part. He does have a lot of texture and weathering detail in his outfit here. Makes sense since Dagobah is a very swampy climate. It's probably very humid. In terms of the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the head there. And he does have hinge at the shoulders, but it's kind of restricted though because that joint is mostly hidden by his shoulder there. He does have a swivel bicep though, which doesn't really help with the aesthetics of this action figure. As you can see, that it looks pretty bad. But he does have a double hinge at the elbow. Despite how bad that looks, this is definitely some of the best arm articulation that Star Wars action figure has to date. You get him really close. The point of this too is not only can he do the handstand, but when he has a backpack on, he should be able to hold it like that with the straps. He does have hinged wrists, and I think a swivel waist there. Yeah. He does have hinged hips though, no swivel cut thigh, which is okay. The knee articulation could be a lot better. There's not a whole lot cut there. So that's really about as far as you can get, unfortunately. But he does have the rocker ankles, which even back in 2013 when this action figure was originally released, it was kind of a big deal at the time. So definitely the most articulated Luke that Hasbro has made, but definitely a much more improvement to be had with aesthetics. So in terms of his accessories, of course you have the backpack here, which is pretty large, and the Yoda that fits in it is a little too big as well. So it turns out the Empire Strikes Back Yoda is much smaller compared to how he appears in Revenge of the Sith or the prequels in general. But it's not too bad. I haven't had problems with this, but I know some people complain about it. He seems to sit in the place alright. There's those dark blue squares on it. Of course, Luke has his lightsaber, or his father's lightsaber, which is a nice blue blade. But he does have an unignited hilt as well, which is this one here. Unfortunately, he really can't use it. He has a plug there where he could, in theory, fit a lightsaber if it had a clip instead. But this is supposed to be plugged in, and there's nowhere on his belt where he can put it. So unfortunately, all he could do is just hold it. And even his hands are not very good for holding things, as you can see. So that's kind of unfortunate. Wonder why they do that. He does have 2 extra hands here, which towards the end of the video I might swap out the hands and we'll see if he can do the handstand. And that's specifically what these hands are used for. I've never actually swapped the hands out before, so I'm kind of curious to see how that'll look as well. He does have his blaster pistol as well, which is pretty much the same exact one as the Han Solo's, I think. And of course, he doesn't really hold that too well either. And even more disappointing, he can't really fit in his holster too well. It's just too large for the holster, as you can see there, where the compensator is. So that's really unfortunate. I suppose if you have a smaller pistol lying around that might fit into that mold, you can make it work. Yeah, look at that. That's about as far as you can get. So definitely not the best engineering work on Hasbro's part with this figure. And yes, you can take the belt off as well. In fact, I might do that when time comes to swap out the hands. But yeah, that's pretty much Luke Skywalker. Not the best one in the world. I wouldn't say it's anywhere near the worst, though. It's good enough. If you have a whole lot of Lukes in your collection, you're probably going to be less upset about this. But if this is like the first Luke Skywalker you've gotten, or if you only got like 2, you're probably going to want a bigger upgrade, and you might be kind of disappointed by this. So that's Luke there. And as you can see, he is a little bit on the shorter side compared to the Vader. Next, we'll take a look at Yoda. And as I said, this is probably the best Yoda that Hasbro's made to date. And it's not entirely accurate to Empire Strikes Back because of how tall he is. The Yoda is actually much shorter in the original trilogy compared to the prequel trilogy. And since this is reutilizing a body from the prequel trilogy Yoda, it's going to reflect as that. The robes are probably a little bit more accurate though, and he does have this necklace around him. He doesn't have the snake though, unfortunately, and I don't think the single release of this guy featured the snake as well. This Yoda did get re-released again for a third time in the TVC line much later. I'm trying to think what number he was. I think he was somewhere in the late 100s, early 200s. And this was probably one of the first photoreal faces for the TVC line at the time. As you can see, turned out really nice. Looks spot on to Yoda. He has the hair back here. And as I recall, the Black Series version of this, the head looked absolutely terrible on it. And the hair looked really odd as well. In terms of the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the head. It's a little stiff though, and you're probably going to only get side-to-side motion out of it. Could argue that it's just basically a swivel neck, but I'm pretty sure that's a ball joint. Maybe it is a swivel. It's hard to say. He's got a little leadway where it can go up and down though. It could be just the plastic flexing. Regardless, you really aren't going to get much more than side-to-side out of that. He does have hinge at the shoulders, and I think he's pretty much only got swivel elbows there. Yeah. Which is kind of odd for a TVC action figure, but it is what it is. It's not too big of a deal on this action figure because Yoda is pretty much just going to be holding Luke's back when he's in the backpack. And even when he's not, he's probably just going to be holding onto his cane here. He does have swivel wrists and swivel waist, I think. Swivel hips. Let's see here. Yep. And then hinge knees. Yep. And then basically ball pull or a ball hinge at the ankles actually. Pretty nice. You can't put a stand on him if you want. You can take these robes off as well. There's really not a whole lot to see underneath. It's just Yoda's brown coat or tunic, basically. The robes are a little bit frayed at the end. That is the aesthetic for this. In terms of Yoda's accessories, I think his belt here might be removable. There, yeah. So you can pop that off. Not a whole lot to say about that. Just has that one string there hanging off, basically. I'll just show this real quick. See, pretty basic. You can tell that's more of a prequel Yoda. He does have his cane here, which is pretty soft and flimsy plastic. It's all tan. Looks pretty good. A little short though. And of course the necklace. So not too bad for Yoda. I would say that he's probably the highlight of the three action figures in this set. Let's see here. And the belt just fits in place. Might have to adjust that later on. Then we'll take a look at Vader here, which probably the least exciting figure of this bunch. And there's really not a whole lot of newness to him, except for the head. The rest of the body here is the same exact Vader that has been used for so many Vaders in the past. And I featured this mold on the channel quite a few times. So not a whole lot to talk about here. In fact, it's the same exact thing as this Empire Strikes Back Vader here. Same everything, even the buttons here are pretty much all the same. Maybe just a little bit less vibrant in the colors, but that's about it. And you can see the huge difference between the helmets there. So that's why I'm saying this helmet for the Cave of Evil set is a little bit off. But there is a purpose to that, and that's mainly in the faceplate here. Let's see if I can take that off. Yep, it just pops off. So if you recall, when Luke is in the middle of training and goes into the cave, he encounters an apparition of Vader. Then afterwards, cuts off the head, and then we see basically the face of Luke Skywalker underneath. So it's not the most handsome Luke. In fact, it barely even looks like Luke, in my opinion. But they did use photoreal for this face instead of the painted one like the last one. And I do think it looks a lot better. To this day, you can still find the Black Series version of this figure pretty cheap online. Probably less than $10 even. Even if you're just getting this action figures because you just want a Darth Vader in your collection, there's definitely much better ones out there to get. And I probably having him displayed like this is probably the best way to have him. That's specifically what the purpose is for. You could reenact that scene where you could just pop the head off here and then have it roll on the floor here, and then have Luke look at it with shock and horror. It might be a nice diorama to make at some point. And here is the faceplate here, which is just partial. I think for this Vader, it would have been better to do like an alternative head, one that's just specifically like that, and then maybe a standard Darth Vader helmet. Be like a 2-in-1. They didn't even bother to paint any of the silver around his breathing apparatus there. At least around the nose part. The two parts here they did though. So other than that accessory, it does have a standard lightsaber, which this actually looks a little bit different compared to the standard Vader sabers we get. At least the paint is a little bit different, much more silver. And you can only hold it in one hand here, because similar to the rest of the Vaders in this mold, he has the open palm here, so you can't really hold much. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to show with this set. I'll go ahead and swap the hands out here, and we'll see how Luke looks with the handstand. And thankfully, his hands pop out all right. Because of his arms being the tooling it is, they feel very fragile. Like they can break. That's part of the reason why I don't swap the hands out very much. And like I said, this Luke stands really good on his own. It is probably one of the best things about this. It's very stable. Let's see here. So you can do a complete 90-degree angle with his hands. Alright, I really hope this works. His arms are kind of fragile. Don't seem to want to stay in the place too well. So close. Alright, I hope that stays. So yes, you can get Luke in a handstand there. It's not very stable though. And I doubt there's going to be any way you can really get Yoda to stand on top of his leg there. Yeah, you could probably fit one foot on Luke's foot there. So about the best you can do is just have him stand to the side like that. Well, we learned something new. So yes, Luke can do a handstand, and if you work with it a little bit, it's not too bad. Perhaps in the future, that's how I'll display him. Let's put the belt back on here. And we'll put the backpack on as well. Is a tight fit on him. Oh, and on the Black Series versions of these characters, I think the backpack actually came with the Yoda. And like I mentioned early on, his arms bending are kind of meant to be in this pose like he's holding onto the straps here. Something like that. Let's see if Yoda can fit. Do something like that. But anyways, I think that's pretty much all I could tell you about this Cave of Evil set. So what I recommend for your collection? Because it's typically so affordable, I would say yes, I would recommend that. It's probably not a set that's for everyone. I know there's going to be some people that have no interest in this at all, and that's okay. You're either really going to want this set for your collection or you don't. It's not the best Luke in the world. It's not the best apparition of Vader in the world. Of course, if you wanted to use him as standard Darth Vader, in theory you could do that, but it's not the best helmet sculpt. The Yoda is the best Yoda, but of course it has so many releases out there and there's so many choices of Yoda that perhaps you might prefer a different one. The Yoda in Skywalker is also a very popular Yoda to this day still. But like I said, I only paid $15 for this, even several months after it was already out, and I think to this day you can still find it for a decent price on eBay. So spending $15, $20, $25 for this, I don't think that's anything to regret. I'm glad I have it in my collection at least. I don't have these characters in this specific scene other than these three here. It has had different releases over the years. I know the Saga line back in 2002, I think, had a Luke or a Dagobah Luke, and this Vader's had a release before, and of course there's been so many Yodas throughout the years. So for me, it was nice to be able to get this set. Does have a lot of accessories. But yeah, overall, I'm perfectly fine with this set. Like I said, definitely not one of the highlights of the vintage collection, but it's good enough for what it is. It gets the point across. If Hasbro did decide to revisit this set again, I would definitely welcome it though. So it's up to you if you would like to own one in your collection. But anyways, that concludes this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for plenty more reviews in the future. There will always be more to come. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. I always appreciate all your support, and check out the links in the description if you haven't done so already. As always, thanks for watching.